Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, it is I am the one and only Mexi here once again, and I am back for the likes of the Mexi Toys videos. And ladies and gentlemen, welcome back for some more of Let's Play of Paper Mario, aka for those of you who live in Japan, Mario Story for the Nintendo 64. So, last time, we've essentially manage able to fully begun Chapter 3 by able to actually exploring into Forever Forest to able to actually figure out the correct path that pretty much leads us to Boo's Mansion, and as a result, before that, we did somehow manage able to come across into the third Blob Blob, which as a result, we did somehow manage to get ourselves the third magical seed for later. And in addition to that, we also did manage able to find yet another, not only HP plus badge, but also with FP plus badge, which stands for, you know, flower points essentially. So as a result, and in addition to that, we also did manage able to play some sort of a game of memorize the forms of one of those boos, did somehow manage able to get the record, which actually as it turns out we did somehow succeed on the first attempt. So yeah, everything else checks out there. So today for this video is that we're about to be continuing exploring for the forms of the inside of the forms of Boo's Mansion. So yeah, relatively speaking now is about the fact that remember that particular record that we somehow already obtained from the previous video? Well, what we can use it with it is that we need to go into one of those rooms, so naturally though we can able to try to figure out how on earth do we able to actually go for that particular door on the bottom left corner, or specifically on the first floor, after that particular very quick wardrobe or a furniture did somehow manage able to move back into its place quickly. So, and by doing so, it's about the fact that, as you can tell, one of those boos in particular was actually blocking the treasure chest, which I believe that might actually contain something important. So relatively speaking, I was about the fact that what we can do with it is that, as you can see, we've come across into that particular thing right there, and as a result, we can now insert a record in there. And before you do with all that stuff though, we need to tap the A button and play a record within a specific rhythm to it, because otherwise, if you do it successfully, then obviously though you can able to actually distract one of those boos and all that stuff. So, although keep that in mind, is about the fact that you can't do it too fast or too slow, because otherwise though you need to be exact with the actual rhythm. So, but if you want to quit play for that particular thing right there, then you simply press the B button, which I'm afraid that we somehow failed this part on the first attempt, but that's okay, because usually relatively speaking we can always try again. So either way, and let's just make sure that one of those boos in particular will somehow manage able to enjoy the music, and do it very very quickly once you're done with it, because otherwise though, if you're too slow, then he'll just simply come back there again. So, and while at it, we actually got ourselves a weight item, so I bet the weight will be useful for something. So either way, so it may look like about the fact that we can now able to actually do some more rooms potentially for the actual progression. So, I mean, relatively speaking, I was about the fact that it wasn't until later on that several puzzles will be pretty tough to solve, especially noticeable towards the end game. So yeah, believe me on that part. So, anyways though, so yeah, a few things I want to talk about this is about the fact that, well, today's date, of course, there is the 4th of April today, in some cases in 2025 today. So, relatively speaking, I was about the fact that recently today, a Minecraft movie has already came out on a big screen, and no matter what though, is about the fact I'm probably not gonna see that film at the end of the day, mainly because as far as I'm aware, I'm still basically hyped about the forms of not only Sonic the Hedgehog 4 movie, but it's not gonna be until 2027 that is, but alongside with that, the Super Mario Bros. Movie 2 for the likes of next year. So as a result, yeah, personally though, is about the fact that it may look alright whenever I see some clips of the film, but relatively speaking, I'm probably not going to get into any further details about the actual story details about the film, but either way, oh jeez, that was a trap. So, opening that particular treasure chest is pretty pointless, doesn't it? Because, as far as I realize, it does not contain anything, so, and as far as I'm aware, it's about the fact that we somehow used the weight item for that particular chandelier from earlier, so as a result though, that way, it should probably kept it there. So relatively speaking, I was about the fact that now we can now able to actually explore into more areas of this mansion. So anyway, so let's see what's beyond in this point. I don't think there's anything else in here until for later, that is. And it may look like that we actually stumbled across those little blocks right there. And suffice to say, if we go on to the next room right here, then obviously though, we can able to actually expect there's actually yet another big treasure chest, as we somehow previously saw it since in Chapter 2. So relatively speaking though, I wonder what's inside in here this time. Of course, there's some more boos, which I suppose we got to play the exact same game as before, but now about the fact that he actually got one of those boot upgrades, which as a result we definitely need to get that for the important progression. So anyways though, there are some other things I would like to point out for the sake of the forms of today's discussion, as far as I'm aware. That obviously though is about the fact that I've somehow managed able to immediately realize about the fact that the actual UI home menu has already been shown in Journey forms of the Nintendo Switch 2. And as far as I see the actual images though, it just looks exactly like the forms of how it does it for Switch 1. But the noticeable differences this time is about the fact that while trying to select something like main menu modes and game selections potentially, the actual outlines is now animated rather than just, well, still, you know, static and stuff like that. So, hard for me to explain honestly, but either way. So, yeah, as you can see, we've somehow now got ourselves these super boots, where basically though, it's like an upgraded version of boots, where basically though it's about the fact that your attack power for using jump has now been increased, and on top of all that stuff though, you actually learn a new ability, which appears to be the spin jump, or should I say, ground pound potentially, because as you can tell, if you come across into some obstacles, like for instance though these boxes right there, you can now able to actually use ground pounds to able to break certain obstacles and all that stuff. So, and speaking of breaking some obstacles though, well, as you can tell, we've actually come across into that particular thing right there in the middle of the room, where basically though is about the fact that we can able to actually now ground pound the actual floor panel, and that way we can now able to actually progress. And there's going to be some other occasional moments where eventually at some point that we need to go back onto the previous chapters at some point in the future, because there might be some very well hidden star pieces, all thanks to the forms of this particular technique right there. And no matter what though, it's about the fact that we need to find those specific spots in order able to actually get some even more star pieces potentially. So because of that though, I'm probably not going to do that just yet though, especially noticeable concerning for that, well, we'll just have to mainly focus on that particular chapter first, which is of course chapter 3, but that's besides the point. So anyway, so there's also another reason about the fact that, well, there's also another badge you can probably try to get, but I'm probably going to save that for later, because obviously though, like I said, that we'll have to mainly focusing on one specific chapter at a time, because I could not afford to able to try to hit back, or should I say, trying to go all the way back to the forms of Toad's Town again, because otherwise though, I have to bring up the actual map again for that Forever Forest. Although, it wasn't until for later on though, that is, that potentially we can able to actually access to the blue pipe, as far as I'm aware, in order able to actually go and travel towards the forms of Boo's mansion a lot more quicker and all that stuff. So, anyway, so it may look like we can't able to actually buy anything in the shops from now on, because I believe we need somebody in order able to actually access the shop. So, yeah, sometimes it can take a bit of some time to able to actually try to figure this out. So, anyway, because yeah, as far as I'm aware, that's where it comes to the forms of our first new look of the forms of the Nintendo Switch 2 menu screen. That, you know, like I said before, it's very identical to Switch 1 menu design. Although the noticeable differences this time is about the fact that they're trying to add it in not only new features like game chat icon, and in addition to that, there's also the forms of a brand new virtual game card icon, which eventually they'll be turned up at some point later on during the forms event sometime in this month, which I suppose that could be also applies for Switch 1 as well. And also, as far as I'm aware, the Joy-Con silhouette is now basically based off from Joy-Cons 2, because, you know, Nintendo Switch 2 is basically, it's like, well, you get the idea for this point anyway, so... And also, like I said before, that thankfully though, the outlines whenever you try to select the menus and all that stuff is actually now animated, as opposed to the forms of, you know, static lack of animated parts from the likes of in the first Switch. So, anyway, so yeah, as you can tell, we somehow now use the spin jump onto that particular floor tile right there, and as you can tell, we immediately turn back into 8-bit Mario, because I can't resist, plus because of the forms that, you know, the most important celebration is about to be up, and during at some point in around 5 months' time now, so as a result though, yeah. And it's also worth noting for too is about the fact that, well, at the very least that Nintendo eShop is still around for Nintendo Switch 2, so at the very least that's something, so... And as you can see, we've now able to actually get ourselves the Boo's portrait, which that's going to be important until you're able to progress, because as far as I'm aware, that we do need to make our way towards the forms of someone that's very important, so yeah, that's what I can really say about this, I guess. So, anyways, let's go and switch over to Bombette right here to blow up this wall. So naturally speaking, we can now able to actually head back to, well, the first floor again, so generally speaking, that's as far as we can able to expect of what's to come, because potentially speaking, as you can tell, we did somehow explore into the basement, basically, or just basement in general, so either way, so now we've basically gone with that. Now before we're able to actually get all the way up back into the second floor, I need to backtrack for a bit, because I get the feeling there's actually a star piece in here somewhere, which, if you try to, you know, ground pound these, and that way, the star piece is now yours to keep. So, yeah, that's actually pretty swell. And I'm still really hoping about the fact that we'll try to gather even more star points, assuming, of course, that we'll try to spend on some more badges at some point. So, assuming, of course, about the fact that we will come across into more quizzes eventually, which I know it's been quite some time since Chapter 2. No, wait, it was actually technically in the Goomba Village, I believe, is where it's at. But that's just mainly because I don't think it's possible we can able to actually do a quest for right now, in terms of the forms of this chapter in particular. So, although I may be wrong, but regardless of such, though, we'll have to think about that. So, anyway, so let's just go ahead and insert the Boo's portrait right there. And once you're able to done that, then I can assure you we can now able to actually proceed into the third floor, which pretty much leads us to the most important aspect about the forms of this particular spot. So, anyways though, let's talk about the forms of some more subjects. In terms of the forms of something relates to Nintendo Switch 2, and that's what it appears to be for the fact that, well, again, it is very unfortunate about the fact that most people complain about the forms of the price tag so far, which is especially noticeable concerning for that, well, with brand new games in particular, both of which are Mario Kart World and Donkey Kong Bonanza. Basically though, both of those games are super expensive, not only for digitally, but also physical stuff as well. Although, keep in mind, though, is about the fact I'm still trying to go ahead and trying to get myself physical stuff anyway, because, you know, I still really love seeing the forms of game covers and stuff like that, as well as the forms of some brief description at the back, and on top of all that stuff, though, with the forms of the inside artwork, if you manage to open up the case and stuff like that, which... yeah, because relatively speaking, in the majority of the Switch 1 games, specifically with the, first-party titles by Nintendo, that what's even cooler for that is that as soon as you open up the game case, that it does manage to contain unique artwork and even some instructions at the back with all their controls and everything, and certain several surprises here and there. So I really don't know if they might do the same thing for Switch 2, but then again, we'll have to wait and see what happens during at some point until exactly 2 months from now. Well, mind you though, about the fact that it might be a bit too early to say for this point right now, because generally speaking, I was about the fact that I just kind of believe that, you know, there's a lot of hype going on. So, despite the fact that most people complain about price tags for not only for several amount of games, but it's also with the forms of Switch 2 itself. So, in fact, as far as I did somehow found out something just recently though, that yes indeed, that the launch titles is going to be, well, finalized in terms of the forms of what the launch titles is going to be for Nintendo Switch 2, and I found several of them, but on the other hand, most of them are pretty lackluster to me. I mean, there are some highlights for sure, like for instance though is about the fact that in terms of the forms of some new games was expected to be listed for launch games for Nintendo Switch 2, obviously, you know, Mario Kart World, and in addition to that, there's also the forms of, actually, kind of think about it, Nintendo Switch 2 Welcome Tour, but only digital only. So relatively speaking, I was about the fact that as far as the rest of the games are concerned, they're just, well, mixed bag. Well, at least on the other hand, though, is about the fact that, well, let's run down the list to see what specific launch titles they somehow got revealed for Nintendo Switch 2. First of all is obviously Mario Kart World, because that's obviously going to be the best launch title for Nintendo Switch 2. And next up we have is Nintendo Switch 2 Welcome Tour, and also Cyberpunk 2077 Ultimate Edition, Split Fiction, and two of those ports of The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild and The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom, both of which are Nintendo Switch 2 editions, which speak for itself because, you know, enhanced graphics and all that stuff, and you get the idea for this point, which, again, we'll let Some Toys Else will mention more about that specific detail, or I will mention more about it during at some point until next Monday and beyond, so, because there's a lot to talk about there. So, anyways, continue things on. Next we have Hitman World of Assassination Signature Edition, so, yeah, nothing else to tell. And next we have is Bravely Default Flying Fairy HD Remaster, Yakuza 0 Director's Cut, and Depodrome Chapters 1, 2, 3, and 4, Fortnite, Civilization 7, and Survival Kit, Kentenzu Gemi Path of the Goddess, I think is what it says anyway, Puyo Puyo Tetris 2S, okay, that's interesting, Rome Factory Guardians of Eskmu, I think is what it says anyway, and also we have Fast Fusion and Nobanga's Ambition Awakening Complete Edition, okay, and we also got let's just say, Street Fighter 6 Standard Edition, Street Fighter 6 Years 1 through 2 Fighter Edition, Arcade Archives 2 Rage Racer, and finally Hogwarts Legacy. So, it's pretty solid for the most part, but of course, the major highlight is of course Mario Kart World, because I'm pretty sure that it will contain that for the majority of the Switch 2 bundles, which I really don't know if it's possible for other bundles in the future for different games, essentially, when it comes to likely not only 2026, but alongside with the forms of 2027, essentially. So, I mean, time will tell, though, so either way. Oh yeah, I should probably be able to actually get on with the forms of the explanations of the backwards compatibility list for Nintendo Switch 2, actually. So, but before we get into that, though, as you can tell, it may look like that Bo, she's going to join with us. So it may look like there's our 5th partner companion. So as a result, Bo, she's now joining the party. And basically, though, if you press the C button down, she will able to allow you to go into transparent mode. And as a result, though, you'll be invincible for a while. And as a result, though, basically, as you can see on the image, it actually shows about the fact that the enemies will not spot at you. But if you want to cancel out transparent, then you simply press the C button down again. And while in battle, she obviously can able to utilize 2 moves, which appears to be Smack, which obviously you have to like keep on flicking the control stick to the left a couple of times, which we'll stay tuned more about it probably at some point in the future battles. So, and as far as I'm aware, she can also do Outer Spook, which I believe what that does is that it just allows you to able to become transparent during in battle, which means you are basically, well, dodging enemy attacks. So, yeah, that's the only thing that matters the most, despite the fact that it actually costs flower points, essentially. So, just like any other, like, secondary moves for, you know, several partners, if you couldn't tell, except with Goom Mario, because obviously the title is for free. So, yeah, that's as far as I can say about it, basically. So, anyway. Oh, and by the way, since we did somehow manage able to recruit with Bo, the lady Boo, more like, basically though, we can now able to actually go back into the item shop, and now we can buy anything in the actual item shop. So, yeah, for instance though, we can either buy Mystery, which I believe that'll activate something more accurately like an item roulette thing, but also about the fact that, as you can tell, we can also buy the Life Shroom, which, by the way, it's pretty expensive for about 50 coins, so, but I couldn't resist about the fact that I'm just trying to able to buy this thing anyway, so because of that though, yeah, I couldn't resist. Well, it wasn't until whatever we get to later on though, that I'm probably not going to spoil things too much, because obviously though, you probably already know what's to come at this point, so, anyway. So let's get into the forms of the next topic at this point, and as of course, Nintendo Switch 2 backwards compatibility lists. And so far, it may look like we can able to actually access to every single games if possible, except one. And can you guess what specific game was not compatible for Nintendo Switch 2? Well, as you may have guessed, Nintendo Labo Toy-Con 04 VR Kit. So basically though, that game is not compatible with Nintendo Switch 2, just because obviously though Switch 2 is a lot bigger in comparison to the regular Nintendo Switch. So that maybe seems a little bit more obvious answer, which is especially noticeable. I really don't think it's possible that you can able to actually access to VR mode for the likes of some games potentially, like for instance though with Captain Toad Treasure Tracker or Super Smash Bros. Ultimate or Super Mario Odyssey, but we do already know for the fact that most of these Switch 1 games will able to receive a free patch update for specifically for Nintendo Switch 2. So as a result though, I'm still very curious to know what features did somehow brings us into. Well, then again, we'll have to wait and see what happens during at some point until in June anyway, so because of that though, in fact that we still haven't got that long left now until, well, we somehow made our way to the forms of the, Nintendo Switch 2's release, so... Oh, and also another thing else I would like to point out as well is about the fact that for those of you other bronies out there, basically though, did you guys know it's been 10 years ago since My Little Pony Friendship is Magic Season 5 did somehow first came out in 2015. It was also during around that time about the fact that Discovery Family was actually very, well, popular at the time, at least to be more specifically in America, so generally speaking it was about the fact that, well, man, time flies, especially because in Season 5 of My Little Pony Friendship is Magic, and specifically the QT Map Part 1 and Part 2, that was actually the introduction to, without a doubt, is the coolest character in terms of the forms of the series to me though. That's of course Starlight Glimmer, which at first glance she was a villain at first, but then eventually at some point by the end of Season 5, all the way up to Season 9, basically though she's now on the good side. So because of that though, and I just want to say that I still really like Starlight Glimmer, especially noticeable because she was interesting, and on top of all that stuff though, her motivation was actually very cool, and she's just so dang adorable to me. But either way, enough about that particular cuteness distractions, but either way. So as you can see, we've come across into even more enemies, thanks to forms to the next area we can able to actually explore into. That's what appears to be both, not only Hyper Goomba, but also Hyper Paragoomba as well. So as a result, according to the status, they both have 7 HP, and 1 attack power and 0 defense power. But here's the catch to this though. As soon as when they able to actually go into their turn, as you can see for a singular Goomba right there, he actually starts able to actually try to charge up the actual attack power, which means that as soon as when he decides to attack you next, basically though, he'll try to do a devastating damage. So because of that though, we should probably take these guys down quicker before anything else happens. So for instance though, let's go and keep on like tilting the actual control stick to the left rapidly, and that actually does a lot of smacking. So yikes, 7 damage. Yeah, extremely deadly. So yeah, and there's also another set of enemies that involves around kind of a similar fate, but we're not going to get into that particular point just yet until presumably for next Monday if possible, so either way. And also, let me know in the comments down below for the question of the day. Have you guys ever seen a Minecraft movie yet? Well, for me personally though, I'm probably not gonna see it anyway, because no matter what though, I still haven't exactly, well, I've heard about Minecraft before, don't forget, especially noticeable because, you know, we've already got both Steve and Alex did somehow join in the forms of Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, in addition to, well, Enderman as well, and relatively speaking, it was about the fact I haven't exactly fully experienced Minecraft as a game itself. Well, usually relatively speaking though, because I was originally trying to get the game on the Switch version because of Mario content, but I'm afraid to tell you that's not the case, unfortunately, because at this point in time, then I'm still saving up for trying to able to pre-order the Nintendo Switch 2, which I believe we've only got about 4 more days left, actually, until we able to actually get a chance to able to pre-order the Nintendo Switch 2, alongside with the forms of Mario Kart World as well. So because of that though, and speaking of Mario Kart World actually, that when it comes to the forms of some tracks has already been confirmed for Mario Kart World, well, there are some interesting tracks for sure. Like for starters though, is about the fact that when it comes to like brand new courses they somehow introduced, which appears to be Mario Bros. Circuit, and in addition to that there's also Crown Circuit, Whistle Stop Summit, and DK Spaceport, which, unlike the forms of how it does on the past Mario Kart games, they somehow managed able to transport you into a different location after when you're done with the one of the races. Well, the uniquest feature about the forms of Mario Kart Tour, or Mario Kart World, I should say, basically though, if you go into Grand Prix mode, every single courses are basically connected, which is pretty cool though, which as a result though, yeah, it is pretty awesome. And also, as far as I've noticed, is about the fact that much like any other Mario Kart games to this point, that obviously the retro tracks will be returning, and we already know for the fact that there's actually a couple of those retro courses will be making a comeback. Like for instance though, we're able to actually see Desert Hills based off of Mario Kart DS, and meanwhile we've also got Shy Guy Plaza or Shy Guy Bazaar from the likes of the Mario Kart 7, and in addition to that, Airship Fortress from Mario Kart DS, and in addition to that, there's also Wario Stadium from none other than Mario Kart 64. So yeah, it's about time they finally managed able to remake Wario Stadium based off of Mario Kart 64. So yeah, that's actually pretty awesome. So potentially speaking now, every single Mario Kart 64 tracks has now finally been remade from the ground up with any other Mario Kart games. So yeah, that's actually pretty top notch. So, and meanwhile we also got DK Pass from the likes of Mario Kart DS as well, and also we've got Wario Shipyard from Mario Kart 7, and also Toad's Factory from Mario Kart Wii, which is pretty awesome. And out of nowhere, we're able to actually expect to see Sky High Sundae from the likes of Mario Kart Tour, or technically Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, mind you, with the Boosticles Pass and everything. And what's even more crazy is about the fact that Moo Moo Meadows is going to make a comeback, and as a result, that's going to be technically the second time that Moo Moo Meadows is going to be making its HD makeover, which at first glance it was obviously Mario Kart 8 / Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, but now Mario Kart World were able to actually bring that track back again, but on 4K resolution. So because of that though, yes, it feels kind of a similar situation as the forms of Super Mario Party Jamboree, that basically though one of those minigame segments they somehow featured in, and that's what appears to be Leaf Leap, based off of Mario Party 5 in one of those showdown minigames, which technically though, that about the fact that we've already got Leaf Leap in not only in Mario Party the Top 100 on the 3DS, but also in Mario Party Superstars, and now we've somehow got it again thanks to the forms of Super Mario Party Jamboree showdown minigame. I mean, it's pretty insane, you know. And speaking of something insane though, there he is, Topper Blopper, and it may look like he did somehow eat one of these boos, so yeah, he's gonna be quite of a threat. So yeah, we definitely got to figure something this out when it comes to trying to deal with the forms of Topper Blopper. So yeah, I will admit it though right away guys, I do apologize about the fact that commentary can be felt a bit off at times. I mean, Let's face it though, I'm still immediately excited about the forms of Nintendo Switch 2 stuff, you know? So with that being said folks, it's about the fact that, suffice to say, we should probably end things off at this point right here. So join me next time for more of Let's Play of Paper Mario for the Nintendo 64. Is that we're about to be continuing exploring for the forms of this particular gorgy place or something like that, and able to try to find the castle itself, which should be about a few meters away. So I'll see you guys until on Monday. Later, fellas.